Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as now it's time for a brand new unboxing video. And before we begin, I want to address something, the elephant in the room as it were. Now those of you who already follow me may be aware that I've previously reviewed a number of toys from both the X-Transbots and the Fans Toys Stunticon set so far. And whilst it's been a bit mad to assemble two different versions of the same characters, it's been a lot of fun too. That said, it's now been suggested to me that I should also take a look at the DX9 versions, for completeness sake or whatever it may be. Well, let me just nip that in the bud right away, as the very idea of me collecting 3 sets of Masterpiece-styled Stunticons is just crazy talk. Absolute insanity. I mean, yes, I have recently embarked on a 3rd set of Combaticons, but that's an entirely separate thing. Completely and totally different kettle of fish, that. Not at all setting a precedent in any way. So I'm going to state very clearly for the record right now that there's no way I'm going to be persuaded that reviewing the DX9 Stunticons, as well as already doing the Fans Toys and the X-Transbot sets, is a good idea. Never going to happen. Right, now that that's cleared up, let's take a look at today's unboxing, shall we?
DX9 D13 Montana was the first release in the third-party outfit's still ongoing Stunticon lineup, and sees them going up against some stiff competition to bring us the definitive Masterpiece-styled Menasor, their version of which will be known by the memorable moniker Attila. Montana is himself a representation of team member Breakdown, who transforms into one of the most classic 1980s Transformers alt modes of all, the Lamborghini Countach. It looks as though DX9 are aping the animation model of the character quite closely, although arguably it's the most stylized set of the 3 we've seen so far, so it'll be good to take a closer look in hand. Already out of the gate, we also have X-Transbots' near complete team, with their Breakdown having been the first release in the set under the name of Crackup. They're going for a very different scale to both Fans Toys and DX9, and have designed their lads to be the same head height as a Masterpiece Carbot. By comparison, Fans Toys have followed DX9's approach of upscaling the car chaps to be significantly taller, but they're cracking on with their set all the same, with Spoiler making 3 out of the 5 of the team already on release. So, with everything at stake and already some good things to say about the other 2 options, I can't wait to see how this 3rd entry in the Stunticon third-party wars fares overall. Let's find out. Last thing before we begin, today's video comes courtesy of TF Source, so I'll put a link to their site in the description. The plan for today is to give you my first impressions after we get that box open, and I'll be aiming to get the full review with loads of photos up on their blog ASAP.
Right, and here's Montana in his box, and if there's one thing I'll say for DX9, they do pretty nice colourful packaging, it has to be said. Looking really quite something in orange. They've clearly taken the theme of this guy to the nth degree, so and it looks great, it has to be said. Interesting to note here that it says it's from Digital XTEL9 Toys, so I had no idea that was their full name, or if indeed that is their full name. Very bizarre, but there you go. Back of the box is looking quite swish too, and very in keeping with their other packaging for some of their other figures. You've got these kind of computerized-esque layout of what Montana looks like just there. Overall, it's a decent package. Well, we're going to dive right in with this one. Tape is cut. There we go, out of the box. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the content, shall we? Well, the first thing to note is the instructions and the character card just here. That's actually been folded to fit inside the box, so maybe that's not your thing, but there you go. There is the main clamshell with the toy itself and a couple of the accessories, including the main gun. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. So, as well as the main toy itself, you also get these several baggies of replacement parts, which is a bit of a strange one. You've got bits for the bonnet, the actual sides of the car with the back wheels just there, and bits for the crotch piece, and various other components that are all intended to be swapped out if need be. And evidently there's been quite a few reports of paint chipping, paint scratching and the like on this toy. So it seems like with later runs, DX9 have just gone ahead and put a load of extra gumph in there, just in case you do need to swap them out. I guess it's easier for them than managing all of the returns and swapping out pieces in after the fact. So a little bit of a strange one, but hey, it's really, really nice that at least they've included them. We'll see if my copy has any paint chipping in just a moment. Additionally, they've gone ahead and included a few Decepticon stickers here as well, which feels really quite unprecedented actually. I can't remember seeing a third-party outfit doing that before. I'm really trying to rack my brains now, but none spring to mind offhand. Right, let's get the main clamshell open, shall we? So in terms of other accessories, you've got the figure's main gun just here, looking very, very nice with a little fold-out handle. And then you have this little piece, which has really been making me laugh, as every video review I've seen of Montana so far, it's only a couple, but none of them have been able to identify what this piece actually is. And it is kind of niche, because I think it's meant to be, from the very first episode, the key to Vector Sigma, when we meet Breakdown, and Megatron is building the Stunticons out of lifeless cars. He puts this little component in the rear end of Breakdown's car mode. And it's not actually identified in the episode itself. It's never stated what it's meant to be. It's just like a little component part, a little Cybertronic part that he puts inside the car. And the clip itself is probably all of like 2 seconds long. But DX9 have included an accessory for it. And evidently it's been confusing everybody. But there you go. That's what this is meant to be. And then, of course, you've got the toy itself. And so here we can see the complete set of what you get in the package with DX9 Montana. Now, as I say, you do get all these spare parts as well, just in case you do get any paint chipping. Having had a cursory look at mine, it doesn't look too bad, actually. It looks like my copy seems okay. A couple of smudges maybe, but we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But certainly it's a decent package, and it's pretty good, to be fair, that the company have decided to include those additional pieces. And here is Montana in his car mode. And first impressions are that, well, he looks pretty good actually. I really like the colour, I have to say. Very, very different to the other two offerings, the Fans Toys and X-Transbots versions, but we'll take a look at a comparison a little later. But he's a much more white colour than those two, much less of the kind of cream or even flesh colour, particularly of the X-Transbots one. So maybe this floats your boat a little more, but he's a bit more of a brilliant white straight off the bat. That said, it seems like some of the colours don't really match all that well. You can see here a different colour in some of the patches on the roof in particular. Different sections just here. They've all got, most of them are kind of that brilliant white, and then there's some that have got this kind of very dark, almost kind of grey colour, so that's a little bit strange. Some red paint on the bonnet section there, although it's looking very streaky and, I don't know, not particularly well applied if I'm honest. A couple of, small smudges and marks on here as well. So maybe these are some of the issues that people have been experiencing. But you can see definitely some streaks in that red paint. So maybe I'll end up swapping out those parts. Yeah, we'll see. Some translucent plastic for the headlights there as well. But again, the finish doesn't seem quite what I might have anticipated from DX9's usual standard. So we'll have to see how we get on with the rest of the toy. Rubber tyres for the wheels, so maybe that'll keep you happy. Some painted sections on the rear, including this sort of blue trim that seems a bit unusual for Breakdown's design, but it brings a bit of visual interest all the same. These sections on the back here being blue, these are the intakes for the Countach mode, and that seems a little bit unusual to me, those being blue. It does stand out somewhat. So I'm wondering if those are going to end up being robot mode feet or something like that, because they kind of have that look to them. But certainly it does break up the design a little bit overall. There's a bit of plastic flash or something on this rear section just here on these vents. It's on both sides and looks a little bit strange once you spot it. I have just noticed these paint scratches here on the side as well. Initially I thought I'd got away with it, but seemingly not, as there's a couple of rather noticeable little dings, particularly on the wing mirror and just to the side there. So yeah, maybe I will end up swapping out those parts after all. That's in addition to the paint scuffs on the front here too, and the little marks in the paint there. Overall, it's really not the best showing. In fact, the more you look for them, the more you find them. Not super keen on the way these pegs break up the spoiler either. That looks really a bit messy. Underneath of the car looking quite tidy though, and not a lot of extraneous kibble there, so that's pretty good. And some translucent plastic for the windshield. That initially looked really quite smudgy, but I've given it a bit of a wipe and it seems to have cleared up quite well actually, so no worries on that score. So right out the box, it's fair to say this guy maybe doesn't make the best first impression, just on account of some of the smudges, some of the mix-match paint as well. That's a little bit weird. These blue sections, I don't know, it's a decent sculpt and overall looks pretty tidy for a Countach, Masterpiece style Countach, but there's a couple of definite downsides to it as well. The biggest one for me being so far is this front end, which just looks quite messy. A couple of scuffs in the paint just here. This red section, very, very smudgy. And just generally doesn't look quite as sharp as some of the other attempts at breakdown that we've seen. That said, they have included these additional sections for the front here, and the paint does seem to be quite a bit better on that. There is a slight scratch, you can just see it there in the left one, but overall it does seem to be a bit better. I will note that the lights here are now painted silver instead of translucent plastic though, so that's a little bit curious. At least they've packed in a solution. I can't say I'm looking forward to the process of doing it, but it's something. I mean, let's be honest, it would have been preferable for this not to have been a problem in the first place, but I guess if you're gonna have these kind of QC errors, then at least a fix right in the box there for you is something, isn't it? Right, well let's go ahead and install his weapon on him anyway, because you can actually mount the main blue gun on top of his car mode, just like some of the competitors. Now supposedly it should just tab right into this section just here, but having had a quick go, I mean it's very tight, needless to say. I'm really having to force it quite a bit just to get it to go. And even then it doesn't feel like it's really gone in well at all. I feel like if I gave that a good hard jab it would just pop right out. So that's a little bit strange. In fact, you can kind of see that the peg hole is widening as you try and force the gun in there, so I'm not really sure it's designed very well. So a bit dubious as to how well the gun works, and then there's the fact that actually there's nowhere to install this little piece, so perhaps it's unsurprising that everyone found it a little bit strange. It should normally go in the rear section of breakdown just here, but I can't see any way to actually fit it in there. It doesn't even seem to lift up or what have you, so yeah, it's a bit of an oddity. In terms of other gimmicks though, there are a couple. I mean, firstly, you can lift up the doors just like that. There's no real working interior or anything like that, but it's a nice little gimmick. It's something that the Fans Toys version does as well, and actually, arguably, this is easier to execute. That said, I don't think these doors sit particularly flush very well. I mean, you know, they kind of have a little bounce to them just there, which, I don't know, doesn't seem particularly quality to my eye. The other real-world Countach gimmick of note here is, of course, the pop-up headlights, which you can sort of achieve by using a fingernail to just pry up like that. Sadly, I cannot get this one to go for love nor money, and indeed I'm not going to try any harder because I've already started to just kind of scuff the edge of the paint there a little bit as I'm doing it, and that's just with my fingernail, so I've really no desire to take that any further, so hey, it'll just have to be winking at you. So hey, if real world nods like this are your thing, then this toy does have them. I don't know how well they're executed, but at least they're in there. So overall first impressions on the car mode are that it's a bit lackluster, if I'm honest. Shame, as the design itself is quite nice and the overall look of the Countach is replicated pretty well, but just the finish is not there. Too many paint scuffs. Yes, they've included the additional parts in the box, but still, that's a bit of a poor show for a toy of this kind. And even then, you've got things like the slightly different colors on the roof, you know, the blue sections that are not supposed to be blue, some of the gimmicks that are a little bit questionable. So overall, it's not the best first showing. So let's go ahead and do a few comparisons, shall we? And obviously the real strength of toys like this comes from when they're able to fit in well alongside either the official Masterpiece line or at least some third-party equivalents. So this will be a real test to see how well it does next to something like Masterpiece Sideswipe anyway. And on first glance, it looks pretty good. I mean, you know, obviously two Countach modes, you know, and they sort of have the right look about it anyway. It's really only when you start to get towards some of the finer details that maybe you might quibble a little bit. But, you know, as a cursory examination anyway, they do seem to slot in quite nicely. All of the main details are there on the DX9 sculpt. If anything, there are a few kind of details like the rubber tires, what have you, that maybe, you know, elevate it slightly above the Masterpiece in some people's eyes, if that's your thing. It's when you get to doing a bit more of a side view that maybe you'll see what I mean. And you'll notice here that actually the DX9 car, if I move that back to the same point, is quite noticeably longer than the official Masterpiece. They're just about lined up about as close as you can get them, just there. And you will see that indeed DX9 is longer. So I think the real strength for me so far in the Fans Toys and X-Transbots efforts has been in taking the proportions of the official Masterpiece and replicating them about as well as they can do. I think actually the X-Transbots version does it best overall. Even Fans Toys is just slightly more bloated. But DX9 really is the outlier here so far, I think, in that regard, in that their car is noticeably larger overall. That said, it really doesn't look bad, and overall they do fit in quite nicely together. I mean, if you're really picky about this stuff, then yes, it is a bit bigger. But if you're in for the DX9 Stunticons, I don't think you're going to be too disappointed. Certainly as a sort of Masterpiece styled effort, it doesn't look too bad overall. Let's just take a look at another couple of Masterpiece style bots next to this guy. I say Masterpiece style, they are actual masterpieces. So we've got Blue Streak just here and Trax, MP25 Trax as well. And when you're not lining it up next to another Countach, then maybe that works a bit better for you, I don't know. It still looks kind of large, to be fair. It does still look kind of large, and the finish, as I say, is a little bit lacking. But overall, the design is a good one. And if this is indeed the set of Stunticons that you're going in for, hey, it works. As a cursory examination, it works. Okay, well now it's time to attempt the transformation. And I'll be interesting to see how this one goes, as obviously it's the third attempt at this character that I've seen. So always intriguing to see how different the various transformations of different third-party toys of the same character can be. So let's get cracking. Right, there we go. That's Montana in his robot mode. And for the most part, that conversion wasn't too bad, although I will say that there's a couple of real clunky bits along the way, unfortunately. I think the main bits for me, like some of the bits around here on the arms, this is very confusing in the instructions, I have to say, so that doesn't help one bit. I had to redo it a couple of times just to kind of get it right. And it's really just to do with the way that the orientation of the figure is in the instructions and the different ways that they show you that the arms should be twisting. It gets quite confusing at several spots, so yeah, that's going to take a little bit of doing first time round, I think, for anybody. Otherwise, there's a couple of bits in the way that they kind of pull apart. So for example, this waist section, you can see here there's just this slight gap in the middle here on the torso, and that's really because this whole upper body section pulls up at one stage to kind of create that gap, and that's so that you can get a bit of ab crunch, which we'll look at in just a minute. But the process of pulling it up, I mean, it was very, very tight. I actually had to loosen the screws over, just like one twist or whatever, just to be able to allow that to happen, because it was just too tight. It wasn't going to give initially. And similar story really with a couple of panels like these little bits. It's wobbling a bit. A couple of panels like these little bits on the sides. They clip in, and it's a real kind of, requires a lot of force to get them to move. So in principle, not a very complicated transformation. In practice, there's a couple of bits that are not all that smooth. Then you get bits like the back of the legs just here, where the doors kind of sit on the side of the leg and it sort of wraps around the back there. And it's a unique attempt at this transformation. It's quite different to the way Fans Toys and X-Transbots do it. I do like it in theory, but in practice, I don't know. It doesn't really sit very flush, and it just ends up looking a little bit awkward to my eyes somehow. It's a similar story with these arms, where the final result just doesn't look all that good, if I'm honest. I mean, I'm going to come out and say it right now, quite honestly. I just don't like the way these arms transform at all, and the final product is really not all that smooth. I mean, you can see here there's a hollow section inside the arm, which is plainly visible because of the way this transforms. Noticeable little red peg just there. This section looks bizarre, just kind of left there. And if I just flip the arm over, you can see it just looks untidy, whichever angle you go with, really. There's no good way of positioning it to have it look smooth. Every sort of angle has slightly odd bits like this, where that just doesn't fit in, feeling like it should. Slightly mismatched colours on these panels too. It's just a bit of a mess, to be honest. Then you've got stuff like the backpack, which is quite clean and tidy, but doesn't peg into anything. It just kind of sits there. And in fairness, yes, it holds up perfectly well. I mean, it's not going to fall down or anything, but it just seems a little bit lackluster to just not be tabbed and to just sit there like that. I did initially think the same was going to be true of this sort of chest section here and the way it pushes up, because it kept sliding down. I then realised that actually it does click into place quite nicely. However, the force required to do so and pushing up was really quite something. I mean, God, I was pulling for all my might at one point. So yeah, overall the transformation is a bit of a mixed bag, it's fair to say. Some bits that are really quite clever and certainly quite unique versus how the other two companies that have done a take-on breakdown have done it. But equally some bits that just really didn't work for me at all and end up feeling a little bit messy in hand. Sadly, the same is true of the finish on this guy. Here you can see there's some quite noticeable paint chipping or paint scuffing on the thighs here, which is, I mean, it looks bad. It looks really, really bad. There are some scratch marks on the crotch plate. Now that is one of the pieces that comes as a replacement in the box, so that's something. But again, it's annoying. This headlight section actually fell out during transformation, and I mean, I can just literally tab it back in there. It's a little tab, but it's fallen out on me a couple of times now. So clearly that's going to require some super glue. Although to be fair, I'm probably just going to end up switching these sections out altogether. There's also some white paint transfer just here on the ends of the feet as well, you can see just here. So that's going to require a bit of touching up to sort that out. In fact, I did find once I was done transforming him that there was quite a bit of white paint flaking off and all over the surface just there, which is really a bad sign. First transformation and you've got paint flaking off everywhere, it's not good. You know, that said, putting aside all the sort of QC problems and the finish problems, what have you, then actually just from purely a look perspective, I do like the look of him. I think he cleans up really nicely. I think it's some good proportions that he's got on him as well. The overall appearance is very strong, apart from some of the messiness with the arms. That looks bad, but that aside, it's not a bad look overall. It definitely does a nice job at representing Breakdown and cleans up pretty well. In terms of articulation, you've got really good range at the head that moves very nicely from side to side, and a good bit of up and down motion with the old head there as well. Likewise, the arms have a really decent range of motion. They tend to rotate upward like that, but actually if you just move it properly, then that's the shoulder joint just there, and then they move all around as well. So good range of motion at the shoulders. You also have a bicep swivel and a good range of motion at the shoulder, allowing the arms to bend up quite far. Got a bit of range of motion at the wrists, back and forth like that, which is really nice actually. You don't see that on a lot of figures, and actually, for my money, I find that makes quite a difference in terms of posing and display. Then the fingers are all molded together, apart from the first finger just there, which is on a separate piece, and the thumb has a bit of articulation too. I will say I also quite like the design of the hands overall. They've sort of got this nice curvature to them, which I'm a big fan of. I've mentioned this in a couple of recent reviews that I've done, that I'm sort of over the very stiff looking hands that you get on a lot of third-party figures, so these are quite nice. Now, like a lot of the third-party Stunticons, this guy has a hip flap just here in order to allow for motion at the hips, but it's a single piece, which is never a great solution as far as I'm concerned. Once you've moved it out the way, then you get a really decent range of motion at the hips. As for the knees, well, you can get 90 degrees. I thought you might get a bit more out of it, to be honest, but that is it, just 90 degrees. Then got fairly decent ankle tilt, almost both ways. You can kind of go outward a little bit, and then a little bit of back and forth as well, just because of the way that the feet are designed. And finally, you got a bit of waist swivel, and indeed a bit of ab crunch as well, as I already mentioned. The transformation specifically has a step to allow for that. Final thing to get him all posed up, of course, is to put his gun in his hand. So you just flip out the little handle section like so, and just go ahead and wrap his hand around it like that. Now, in a weird move, there's no peg or anything to keep it in place, so you're relying solely on the friction of the fingers to hold it stably, and yeah, that doesn't really happen, so it does wobble around quite a lot. Still, once you get him all posed up, he does look pretty decent, it's only fair to say. And there is enough range of motion overall to get some fairly decent poses out of him too, and he poses quite naturally actually. I'm still not a big fan of this hip skirt and the way it all folds forward as one piece. I think that could have been done better, but you know what, overall, yeah, he looks okay, he looks good. I will say that messing around with him, you don't get the same kind of quality, sturdy feel that you do for something like Fans Toys, for example. But, you know, it's fun nonetheless. It's just a little bit disappointing that some of the joints feel a little bit loose and the overall finish is lacking. I mean, look, I'm really not exaggerating. The legs, just as an example, the legs do kind of wobble side to side, so there's definitely a lot of give in those joints. Still, they're robust enough to pull off some decent poses, as I say, and you can even get a fairly decent run out the fella as well, so it's really not all bad. It's just a shame that the finish isn't there and just doesn't feel like a very polished toy overall. I will say I do really like the face on this guy, and it looks really nicely defined. It's a little bit stylized if anything, but I think it does a good job at representing the character, and you know, red faces sometimes can look a little bit blown, and there's no worries on that score. It looks really, really nice. So overall, he's a fairly decent robot mode, looks really nice, maybe a bit of a mixed bag and the finish is not there. But let's see how he shapes up next to some comparisons, shall we? So let's pop him over to one side. Now first of all, we're going to take a look at Ocular Max Incursus, who I reviewed just last week. And wow, he's a big chunky fella, isn't he? So it's quite interesting to see how they shape up together. And they look pretty good, I think. It's interesting to note because, of course, well, firstly, Incursus is massive, but it's worth saying that the DX9 Stunticons are quite oversized as well. They are large fellas. So if you're expecting kind of carbot-sized, Stunticons, then that's not who they are. So you can see already against the massive Incursus, he's quite large. In fact, if you were to compare him with some Masterpiece carbots, then you'll see exactly what I mean. Because he really is head and shoulders larger than them. I mean, this is the likes of Masterpiece Red Alert and Smokescreen, and you can see how much he just towers over them completely. So, you know, if you are, in your mind's eye, imagining Stunticons that are going to sit at head height with your Masterpiece carbots, then, you know, maybe this isn't the set for you. And I've said it all along that I think size is ultimately going to be the biggest deliberator that a lot of people are going to have to consider when it comes to which set of third-party Stunticons they want to go in on. And I think this just shows you what I mean. I mean, if I were to include the likes of someone like Masterpiece Inferno, then you can see there that even Inferno, who, you know, is a sizable dude, he's a big Transformer, that still is he's smaller than Montana. So really, it is very large interpretation of, and I think does, for my money, push the envelope of what you could legitimately call Masterpiece scale. I mean, just another comparison, but you know, you've got the likes of Masterpiece Wheeljack and Sunstreaker just there, and I mean, you can see that Montana is just so big. He's just huge in comparison. I mean, especially when you bring in the likes of, you know, little Bumblebee just here, who is small, but I mean, Montana, Bumblebee doesn't even reach his waist, which is just mad. I mean, ultimately, scale is going to be, as I say, the big question with these. And some people like their Stunticons to be much larger. Some people like them to be in line with the Masterpiece Carbots, which is, what X-Transbots are giving you with their set. So really, it is up to you what you prefer. But I think even a taller scale, this is pushing the boundaries a little bit to my eye. I mean, if I bring in MP44 Optimus Prime, maybe that gives you a good idea, because I mean, even then, Montana's not that much smaller. So it is a bit crazy. They are tall, needless to say. They are very tall. I mean, certainly when you look at other third-party efforts, like, we've got some of the Unique Toys Combaticons just here. This is obviously their Vortex and Blastoff. And, these are not small robots by any means, but they are dwarfed by Montana, absolutely dwarfed by him. So again, it kind of opens up that question mark on the rest of your collection, maybe, that if the Stunticons are meant to be this large, then, I mean, do you really want them to be bigger than the likes of the Combaticons and the Constructicons and the Predacons and so on and so forth? So it's a big question mark, definitely. Of course, where you might choose to put him is next to the likes of MP36 Megatron, Masterpiece Soundwave, and then, for my part here, we're just going to bring in, just on the end there, Make Toys Meteor. And you can see how well they line up. And I mean, I guess there he does work pretty well. If you're going just purely for a Decepticon lineup and you like your Stunticons looking larger or looking maybe more at kind of eye level with the likes of Megatron, maybe that works for you. Now taking a look at him versus some other third-party Stunticons, we can take a look at him against Motormaster. This is the Fans Toys version, just there, looking rather large, and the X-Transbots version. I don't yet have the DX9 Motormaster in hand. I will do soon, so we can do a comparison of those three then, because that's my life now. But yeah, here you go. You can see these three toys together, all different companies' versions of Stunticons, and how they compare up. And yeah, again, Montana is very tall, needless to say. Maybe that works for you, but style-wise, he's sort of somewhere in between the two, I guess. But it's interesting to see nonetheless. And now we're going to take a look at him with the other breakdowns, just to give you the full breakdown, I guess. Sorry, had to be done. So here's the Fans Toys version, looking similar-ish in terms of height. And then you have the X-Transbots version. So this is Fans Toys Spoiler and X-Transbots Crack Up. So that is your three third-party breakdowns. And I think obviously this is the comparison that's most useful. And for my money, it's really interesting to see Montana in hand versus the other two, which I'm already very familiar with. And straight off the bat, the most striking thing actually is the color. I mean, all three do things very differently, but this is really kind of, as I said earlier, bone white in comparison to this sort of very off-white, almost creamy color, like cream color that you get on the Fans Toys. And then this more flesh colored, I guess it is a weird color on X-Transbots. So you can see, I mean, it's it's a little bit like, new generation, or I suppose mint generation 1 toy, been out in the sun a little bit too long, yellowed for a good sort of 30-40 years or something like that. It's like gradations of how yellowed your G1 toys are. But yeah, of course, the size is very different, and this is really interesting. It's something I just want to talk about for a second, because, for my money, this guy works really well size-wise for me. In my mind's eye, if I picture the Stunticons and what I would ideally want, they're the same size as the Carbots. So I've always felt that for me personally, scale chart be damned and whatever else, X-Transbots have delivered as far as I would want the size of the Stunticons to be. It's just my personal preference. And I know a lot of people disagree with me, because I get a lot of people sticking up for the Fans Toys attempt and saying that this is the height that the toys should be, and that, Fans Toys have done it again, and all of this. I had someone, as I said, say to me the other week, to throw my X-Transbots versions in the bin, for example. But what's really interesting is that when I look at the comments on Montana, who's basically the same height, slightly taller, you see a lot of people saying, oh, it's too tall. It's just too tall. It's that simple. I don't want them to be that big. And I do wonder, if I'm honest, if it's a little bit of the same old, you know, Fans Toys goggles, I guess. Fans Toys goggles, is that what we can call it? Just people that are so willing to defend that company to the hilt. And look, I like Fans Toys, so don't get me wrong at all. I like what they do a lot. But I don't think you can particularly critique the one and not the other. Do you know what I mean? Because this is the same interpretation of the height. Maybe it works for you legitimately, and maybe you do prefer your Stunticons to be larger, but you can't say that this one works and this one doesn't in that regard, because, you know, they are basically the same. But anyway, all of that aside, as I say, size will be the biggest question that most people have when it comes to this set. So really, it just depends what works for you. If you want Stunticons that are the same size as the Carbots, it's X-Transbots. It's this guy right here. And that set is nearly complete now. We're just waiting on the trailer section for Motormaster, and then it'll be done. We've got the full combined form. If you like nice polish and you like a really, really good finish, Fans Toys is the set, I think, in that regard. They've definitely got the nicest overall fit and finish and polish to the toys that we've seen so far. And they're 3 deep in a team of 5, and then there's an additional trailer section as well. Some speculation about when that's going to be released at the moment, but you know, we're potentially over halfway with that team. Then you have DX9, which I guess, if I'm honest, seeing it in hand, it still feels like the outlier to me, to be completely honest. The design is nice, the sculpt is nice, there are good things to be said about it. The finish is the worst of the 3 by some mile. The scuffs, the paint chips, the slight give in the joints, it's just not how it should be, frankly. And then there are some design oddities like these bits on the arms and the back of the legs, which just feel a little bit messy for my liking. So overall, I would say it feels like the worst of the 3. It does do some things well, but it does feel like the worst of the 3. And look, I'm not trying to be too overly harsh on Montana. As I mentioned earlier, there are some things I like about it. It's just overall, as a quality product, it just feels like a bit of a letdown. I expected more from DX9, to be completely honest. I mean, I've enjoyed a lot of their previous releases. Their Power Glide, I think, is excellent. I think it's a really, really terrific product. And when it comes to Bayformers, their Hot Rod, their Last Night Hot Rod, I just reviewed that recently and I gave it a proper glowing write-up. So they can deliver. It's just something about this set feels like a bit of a letdown so far. Anyway, I'll be checking out their Motormaster soon too, so it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. And overall, with this guy, although there are some positives to be had, unfortunately, first impressions wise, it's a boot. So that's DX9 Montana. Now, for better or for worse, I'll be working my way through the rest of the team, starting with their Motormaster soon, so keep an eye on the channel for more to come. I'll also put a link to TF Source's DX9 listings in the video description, and I'll be aiming to get the full review and photos of Montana up on their blog ASAP. So thanks again for watching, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and there's a shout out to all my Patreon subscribers coming up at the end of the video in just a moment. Otherwise, that's it from me, so enjoy the rest of your day. TTFN.